what's up? If you think about it, the Cuban sandwich is kind of like the ultimate grilled ham and cheese, but instead of just having ham and melty cheese, it's also got super crispy bread, it's got pickles, mustard, and tender roasty pork. When you combine everything, it's all the good tasting stuff all at the same time. And oh yeah, it's fried in butter. To get started, we need to make the marinade for this roasted pork. For that, I've got a glass bowl, and into it, I'm gonna measure 125 grams of lime juice, that's roughly 3 limes worth, 125 grams of orange juice, that's 2 medium oranges juiced, and then a bunch of garlic, 75 grams worth. That's roughly 3 full heads. And a quick trick to get that much garlic peeled quickly is to smash apart the heads, scoop them into a bowl, cover that with another bowl, and then shake it really hard for like 30 seconds. It's very loud, but it does work. That's how we do it in the restaurant, and usually about 90% of these cloves will lose their skins, and you only have to hand peel just a couple of them. Now, to chop all this garlic, I'm actually going to use a garlic press. It's a very useful tool in my opinion, but if you're too cool for a garlic press, or if you don't have one, you can chop it up with a knife. Either way, 75 grams of garlic's going into the bowl, followed by 5 grams of dried oregano, 15 grams of cumin, and 10 grams of coarsely ground black pepper. I'm going to whisk everything up to combine, and there we go, Cuban flavored pork marinade. It's super garlicky, it's quite tart, and it's going to make this pork taste very dope. Speaking of pork, I've got a 6-pound or 2.5 kilo pork butt that's from the shoulder, and the bone is in the meat. I prefer that in particular because the meat near the shoulder bone has a lot of marbling, and that's going to melt into a very luxurious tasting roast of pork. Now, to make sure that the salt and the marinade are going to fully penetrate this pork shoulder, I'm going to make 3 large scores on each side of the meat about 2 inches deep. If we didn't take this extra step, the outside would be very salty and sour, but the inside would be pretty bland, and that's not very pro. Next, I'm going to season the outside of this pork by thoroughly hitting it with some salt. I'm going to make sure to get that well distributed even deep into those cuts that we just made. And don't forget about the sides of this thing. There's a lot of surface area to cover here, and yeah, don't be shy with the salt. This is a large piece of meat, and it would take an astonishing amount of salt to actually make it taste salty. Next, I'm going to grab the vessel that this is going to be cooking in. That's my 6.5 quart Dutch oven, but a cheap grocery store foil pan will also work really well. And then we're going to snug the pork up into the Dutch. From there, in goes half of the marinade that we just made on one side. I'm going to make sure that gets rubbed all over everywhere, especially into the scored part. Then I'm going to flip it over. From there, the rest of the marinade goes down on side 2, and you might be thinking that this is an excessive amount of garlic going onto this pork shoulder, and you're right, it is. But to me, to get the flavor of delicious Cuban roast pork, we kind of need it. As it cooks, that garlic's going to mellow significantly and get kind of sweet and taste very, very good. Once this pork butt is well rubbed with the marinade, I'm going to cover it now with the lid and throw it in the fridge to marinate for as little as 4 hours, but preferably overnight. The next day, it's time to roast this thing. So the oven gets preheated to 250F or 121C, and as you can see, the pork really hasn't changed much overnight. It may be a little bit firmer from all that salt, but it still looks very garlicky. We know it's going to be good. So the lid goes on, and that pork goes into the oven to gently roast for 6 to 8 hours. 6 hours later. My house is full of savory, roasty pork garlic smell, and this pork is perfectly tender. The way I usually tell if pork is tender is by sticking a fork in to see how much resistance I get, and in this case it's almost none, and that's ideal. The other way is to grab the shoulder bone. This kind of acts as a doneness meter. If you can easily pull it out clean like this with no resistance, you're in business. Again, cook times are going to vary widely depending on your oven. I would say check at 6 hours no matter what, but be prepared to go as long as 8 hours. Now I'm going to pop a lid on this pork and then set it off to the side to rest, and in the meantime I'm going to thank the sponsor of this video, Bright Cellars. If you're not familiar, Bright Cellars is a monthly wine subscription like Netflix, but it's wine and delivered to your door. It's the future, basically. Apparently, a couple of MIT students who are really into wine got together to design a service that really helps people discover cool wines. The process is super simple. You take a 30-second quiz with their wine algorithm, and that does its magic, and it pairs you up with wines that are tailored exactly to your taste. Lauren and I have been into wine for years now, and I thought I knew exactly what we liked, but Bright Cellars has turned me on to a lot of different flavors and some really fun new wines. Another thing I really love about Bright Cellars is that all the bottles come with these cool educational cards that tell you all the stuff that I really like to know, like what's the origin, what do you pair it with, and what's the best way to serve this wine. So to give Bright Cellars a try, click the link in my description and take a quick wine quiz and get 60% off your first 4 bottles of wine. It turns out this wine algorithm might know you better than you know yourself, and that could be a real thrill. So to give it a try, click the link in my description and get 60% off your first 4 bottles. Thank you, Bright Sellers. Now, you guys know we're gonna be making the bread for this sandwich. So to do that, I'm gonna grab my stand mixer, and into the bowl of that, I'm gonna measure 240 grams of warm water, 9 grams of instant yeast, 15 grams of sugar, and some lard. 20 grams to be exact. And this is pretty common in Latin style bread, but if you don't have any lard on hand, go for 15 grams of olive oil instead. Behind that goes 350 grams of bread flour and 9 grams of salt. The dough hook goes on, and I'm gonna start mixing this on low speed for 3 minutes. I'll mention real quick that the lard should be room temperature when mixed into doughs like this. Just like butter, it's saturated fat and it will not be absorbed into the flour when it's chilled. Once everything's come together into a shaggy mess like this, the speed goes up to high, and we're gonna continue to mix for 6 more minutes. After that 6 minutes, this dough should be slapping around and clearing the bowl like this. Now, to find out if this dough is where we need it, we're gonna give it a little grip and rip to see if there's any shearing or tearing, and that feels great. So the dough goes into a medium bowl, and we're gonna round it off just a little bit to tidy it up. This dough isn't gonna get any strength building folds, so this little bit of rounding helps keep things organized for shaping later on. Now, the lid goes on, and we're gonna check back in 90 minutes. 90 minutes later, this dough will have more than doubled in size, and when you poke it, it's probably gonna deflate just a little bit. That's totally fine. We're using really strong bread flour here, and this dough is very forgiving. Now, we're gonna flip this onto a lightly floured work surface and divide it into 2 roughly 300 gram size pieces. From there, we're gonna do a pre-shape. To do that, I'm gonna fold in both sides, flip the dough over onto those folds, and then come back and round it off into a nice loose ball. This pre-shape move is gonna give us a uniform piece of dough to start shaping from in a second, and it is invaluable when trying to get bread into a longer, skinnier shape. Once both of these dough balls are pre-shaped, we're gonna cover them with a tea towel and let them rest for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, these doughs have relaxed quite a bit, and now they're ready to be shaped. So for that, I'm gonna move one of the balls out of the way and then flip the other one to be seam side up. From there, I'm gonna poke to degas this just a little bit and then stretch it out into a rectangle shape, and then grab the bottom third and start to roll it over. It's very important to note that as I roll this over, I'm also tucking it back to create internal strength and tension. It's not just a roll-up move. I roll it forward, then I tuck it back with my fingertips. Once this is rolled into a tube, now I'm gonna use my thumbs and pointer fingers to gently roll this out and try and keep the seam that we just rolled up under the bread touching the board. From there, I'm gonna flatten out the ends a little bit, and now this needs just a second more to rest before we fully stretch it into a longer roll. So in the meantime, I'm gonna grab a sheet tray with some parchment paper for these to land on, and that's gonna get a solid pinch of semolina flour or cornmeal to keep these from sticking. To finish these, I'm gonna use the palms of my hands and my thumbs to apply pressure and roll these out that last 25%. We're looking for a roughly 14-inch or 36-centimeter long tube, and that looks perfect. Over to the parchment it goes. I'm gonna roll number 2. That goes on the parchment. Now to finish this shape, I'm gonna flatten the tops of each of these rolls. Fully round bread, in my opinion, always leads to a precarious internal sandwich structure, so flattening it out a little bit is gonna be a huge help. From there, we're gonna top that sheet tray with another sheet tray and let these proof here on my cutting board for 60 to 90 minutes. 60 minutes later, these look gassy, buoyant, and alive. To confirm they're ready for the oven, I'm gonna give them the poke test. They're gonna hold that poke and gently give it back. That looks perfect. Now, using a razor blade, I'm gonna give them a score right down the middle, about a 1/4 inch deep or so. From there, into a 350F 190C oven they go for about 25 to 30 minutes. Now, it's a good time to mention that this is a pretty easily doubled recipe, and there is no doubt that you could bake 4 of these at the same time. So it might be a good idea to double up and freeze a few of these guys for your future sandwich pleasures. And after 25 to 30 minutes total, we're gonna pull these out and take a look. These rolls are a new staple in my arsenal for sandwich making, you guys. Subs, Italian beefs, Cubans, grinders, whatever, you name it. Okay, now, finally, it's time to sandwich. To get this Cuban cooked properly, I'm gonna use 2 cast iron pans. I'm heating up my good, well-seasoned one here over medium-low heat, and then the second one is just a flat, heavy thing to press this Sammy, and that's gonna get set off to the side. To build this sandwich, I'm gonna lop off the ends of my roll, then cut it in half, and then half again. From there, we're gonna get it set up on a little baby sheet tray, and then start to build. First goes down yellow mustard. I prefer store-bought nuclear yellow stuff to anything homemade or fancy or Dijon. This stuff is Berman's from Aldi, and it cost 89 cents. It's super sour and it tastes like it looks: yellow. Then comes Swiss cheese. And if we played our cards right, these rolls should just about perfectly fit this cheese. Now goes down some nice ham. Roughly 3 to 4 slices is what I prefer because I like a ham-centric Cuban sandwich. Also, make sure that this ham is nearly shaved. My deli has a scale for thickness, and I asked for the thin end of number 2, please. Once that ham is thoughtfully shingled on, next comes the roasted pork. And if you're wondering, hey Brad, wasn't that just a giant chunk of meat a second ago? And yes, to get this stuff sandwich ready, I scooped out about half of the rendered pork juices from the roasting and then went in hands first to gently tear it apart. Don't over shred this, you guys. This stuff is very tender and it should stay in large, nice bites that are barely held together. It can't get too broken down. Once everything's looking good, I'm going to toss it to coat with those juices and then give it a taste.
It's freaking juicy.
Now the Sammy's gonna go into the oven to warm up for about 3 minutes because in most scenarios, the ham and shredded pork are probably coming straight out of the fridge. After that 3 minutes, everything is getting toasty, and now we're gonna finish the build of the sandwich by shingling some long slices of pickles. This is a big dog sour pickle that I got from the deli by the ham, and to slice it this way, I cut it in half with my serrated knife and then went along the bottom like this. You might be able to buy pickles that are already sliced long and sandwich ready like this, but I wanted to show you guys that I am a bad boy with a serrated knife, and yeah, you should know that about me. Finally, the pickle side's gonna get laid onto the pork side, and now we must do the most important step for a Cuban, the press. Over at my preheated cast iron, I've got some clarified butter or ghee going down. I'm gonna lay in about 2 tablespoons and spread that around. Regular butter has solids in it that would burn, and that's not ideal for frying sandwiches. Next goes in our built Sammy, and I'm gonna make sure that that's well smeared in butter, and then I'm gonna press it down with my hand to flatten things out. From there comes my heavy flat thing. In this case, it's a neglected kind of oxidized cast iron pan that has definitely seen better days, but it doesn't matter. It's just here for mass. We're gonna press the sandwich into the pan for about 2 minutes to get that signature toasty, brittle, crunchy Cuban crust. After 2 minutes, we're going to check back to see how it looks, but be careful because some cheese melt might have gotten things stuck to the pan, and you definitely don't want to tear anything up. So I use a tool to gently lift it up like this. That looks very toasty, so we're gonna flip it over, hit it with some more clarified butter, and then we're gonna press it again with the cast iron. After 2 more minutes, or 4 minutes total, we're gonna uncover this sandwich, and look at this thing. Oh my gosh, it looks crisp, it looks melty and toasty, and it looks ready to eat. So of course, we're gonna move this over to a cutting board and give it that classic diagonal cut to keep it tradish. And listen to this thing. It sounds perfectly crisp and brittle. And I want to call out that the texture of a sandwich like this is just as important as the shaved ham, the melty Swiss, or the roasty pork. Pair it up with some garlicky dill pickles and some super sharp yellow tasting mustard. And honestly, this might be the best tasting sandwich on earth. So I really hope you press yourself one of these soon. Let's eat this thing.